I'm joined now by Samantha Ridgewell. She is Managing Director of Empower Development. Well, Samantha, let's start with attracting talent to the industry. It's a huge issue for insurers. So in the round, how good is the insurance industry at doing it?
We're very good at doing it if we've been able to tell somebody what our story is to tell. So I think insurance careers are fascinating. If you can sit somebody down for 10 minutes, usually you can kind of convert them at least to being interested in finding out more about insurance. Our issue is most people don't give it 10 minutes because the reputation of insurance comes as quite a kind of dull perception. So we have essentially the secret, the best kept secret, lots of people refer to it as, where the careers are fantastic. The challenge is young people don't necessarily know about them unless you already know someone in the industry. And that's always often meant that we can find enough people, but when we try and look for diversity and looking for a kind of wider pool of people, it's quite a challenge. We've come a long way, but there's a huge way to go.
But is it a particular issue for insurance? Because you might argue you could say the same thing about accountancy and all sorts of other careers. Fundamentally, if you asked a young person, they'd say, God, that's the sort of thing my dad or mum would do.
So I think parents would recommend that kids become accountants, lawyers, doctors. There's lots of professions that children are familiar with. And I think it's often because their day-to-day lives allow them to be familiar with it. We come across those roles, whether it be through the things that we are doing or just media interaction telling us that these are good careers. Insurance is not often talked about. We don't need it until we are essentially already grown up and have made those career choices. And if it is talked about, it's in a very negative light or in a very kind of basic way that narrows down maybe the opportunities that we've got available to us. So there's a real gap in awareness of young people who are looking at professional careers, having a look at that as their option.
So what would your top tips be for getting young people engaged early with the idea of insurance?
As an individual, so any individuals listening to themselves, talk about it. I think often when we talk about our careers, people will say they work in finance because we assume that people will roll their eyes if we say insurance, and that's not allowing us to kind of spread the word. So making people aware of what your individual career story is, then that's going to create kind of role model and conversation to bring people along with you. And when it comes to us as an industry as a whole, it's about getting out there in front of kind of media channels, social media channels, places where young people are. So rather than expecting them to come to our websites, we're finding them on their platforms.
So if you've got an example, because I know you do a lot of TikTok, so talk us through, how's that worked for you? Because particularly, I suppose, skeptic would say, well, TikTok's the sort of thing people go for entertainment. They don't go for career advice.
It works because that's where the young people are. So they're spending most of their time now on TikTok. And it's not just young people, but certainly there's a huge demographic there for young professionals or young students. What we find on TikTok is the algorithm is incredibly smart. So rather than people searching for insurance, I can hashtag not going to uni or student life, student problems, and then the algorithm's going to find people at university or in their A-levels looking for their first job and show them my content. And if they are intrigued to find out more about the careers or look at any of the opportunities that I've shared, then it's there for them to start looking into it. So we've had over 3 million views across the TikTok page, over 20,000 followers now, and there's at least 20 people that are working in the market who have come through TikTok who would have never otherwise looked into insurance.
Do you have any other tips for doing a TikTok? Because I suppose you've talked a little bit about the algorithm, but even with that, the content can either be the sort of thing that appeals to people, or there's always that. I'm sure there's a lot of people who thought I should do this, and they thought, oh, what if I just look terrible on it?
Yeah, well, my kind of safety net is if it's rubbish, TikTok doesn't show it to anyone. So TikTok likes content that people will watch the whole video of. The more engagement you get, the more it's going to show people. So I do tell myself sometimes, like, the worst ones are fine, they won't get seen. And it's just kind of a nice mind trap to encourage myself to put them out there. But the reality is there's no right way of doing it. You need to just be yourself and be authentic and turn up on it enough consistently. Sometimes you'll see content creators who are on there for months and months and months with hardly any engagement, and then suddenly one TikTok goes and they'll go much higher. So it's not something you can look at for kind of necessarily short-term rewards, but then the engagement is there kind of often in the long term for people who show up consistently. The other thing you can do is support each other's accounts. So for example, London Insurance Life are on there, so I'll regularly repost theirs or duet theirs, so then my followers will engage with what they're doing. And the more people we have in insurance that are doing that together, the more of a kind of algorithm sort of pocket we will have to speak about insurance roles.
Our conversation so far is focused on attracting new talent in terms of youth into the industry. But is there a danger that too much of that conversation means somewhere in the mix, the insurance industry is putting off people who might be looking at a career change. They could be in their 30s, 40s, even older.
There's a shortage of talent right now across the market. So I think there's opportunity at all levels. Talent attraction for young professionals is very different to encouraging people to transfer over from a different industry and looking open-mindedly at transferable skills. I've seen some fantastic examples in clients, actually, even just in the last few weeks, where they've identified people who can come over from kind of either a different side of insurance or insurtech or a completely different industry and move those roles move those roles over. Open-mindedness is key. So often companies will encourage that, recruitment teams will encourage that, but individual line managers, it's always quite reassuring when you think someone can hit the ground running. So when you're going outside of the box, you're probably going to have a slightly longer induction trainee period. But for the longer term encouragement, that diversity of thought and those different skills are going to pay off.
We've talked a little bit there about getting people into the industry, but once people are in, what are your thoughts on what they can do to make the most of their career for themselves and frankly for their colleagues around them?
There's so many opportunities for career progression in insurance, and there's some real straightforward ways that people can put into practice. Unfortunately, I think a lot of the time people focus just on doing a really good job, and that's essential. We do need to do that, but it is also the status quo. You are expected to be doing a good job, and it's not necessarily going to set you apart. So what I focus on supporting people with is identifying how to make sure you're doing a good job on the right work that will get you noticed and demonstrate your potential, but also focusing on things like building that brand and building that visibility in your network so that opportunities come to you as well.
So as a rule of thumb, let's say you're paid 8 hours a day to be in the office and you sort of think, well, I should certainly do my 8, maybe a little bit more, but what percentage of your time should be spent doing the job and what percentage of your time should be spent demonstrating or telling people you're doing not just a job, but a good one?
Yeah, I think that's a personal question. It's something I ask people to look at for themselves because it does depend on, firstly, how much energy does that take up for you to go out to networking events? Is that something that energizes you or is something that actually maybe drains you a little bit? Also, how far into your career are you and what are your commitments outside of work? So it's for me, it's more looking at quality over quantity. So if you are able to get to lots of networking events, then that's fantastic. Absolutely spending 1 event, 2 events a week is going to fast track your network. But if that's not something you want to do, there are lots of other ways that you can maybe spend a little bit less time but have a little bit more quality in what you're putting out. One of the easiest examples of that is LinkedIn. So you could spend 10 minutes creating a post on LinkedIn and it might reach 4,000 people in your network. That's 4,000 people that you wouldn't have got round and seen, and it's only taking you 10 minutes. Or things like internal newsletters, putting forward case studies or writing up reports on successes that you've had in the business for you or your team. The internal marketing teams are always looking to promote as well, but it's going to get your name out there and your successes out there.
Do you come across people who say, I get that, but it all just feels a little bit narcissistic and me. I just feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that hold people back. I would say if you are always doing it for you, then it might come across potentially that way as well. But I think we often have almost a benchmark of where we think that comes in, and the reality of where it might come across like that is much further down the line of when we're telling ourselves. But if you are also turning up on LinkedIn, thanking other people, giving credit to other people, and it's not always just about when you've had a success, then that kind of consistency and authenticity is there as well.
So what are some of the unwritten rules for, I say, getting to the top? What are some of the things you should be thinking about? Thinking, I really want to maximise my career.
Networking is going to be really high up there. And that's not necessarily networking about having thousands of contacts in your phone book, but making sure that people know who you are so opportunities come to you. We work in insurance. We talk about risks that are known versus unknown risks all the time. We all prefer the known risks. And it's the same when we look at careers. If you are a known entity, then more opportunities are going to come towards you. Also, we need to look to things like the behaviours and the brand that you're putting across. And again, there's no right version to this, but it's identifying what does good look like for you, what you want a really good day, and making sure you're portraying that as often as you can in things like body language, but also the conversations that you're having with people, the way you're showing up in meetings, speaking up in meetings, and completing challenges in a really positive way.
I suppose for a lot of people, being senior means being in charge of people, and that's a totally different skill set from doing a job. I mean, I look at my own profession of journalism originally. What tended to happen is the person who was the best journalist, so the best person getting stories, suddenly ended up in charge of 3 or 4 or 6 other people. Totally different skill set. And some managed it and some crashed and burned spectacularly. How do you go about if you do get a promotion, how do you go about making sure, you've got that other skill set, or you've got enough time to learn it without having some negative consequences for yourself and a team?
Yeah, it's a very common challenge. The technical expert isn't always the best manager, but often they are a very good technical leader. So you're going to see that progression coming through. I'd recommend to people that before, if you've lined yourself up as someone you want to go into management of, like you kind of hinted at in your question there, the more senior you get, the busier you get. So there's no harm in going on some management training as somebody with potential for management, as long as that's kind of in the sort of short to medium term. HR departments will often encourage that. So you can start developing those skills, but also looking for ways to practice them, such as like mentoring, supporting with interviews, training, induction for new joiners. So it's not going to a complete jump when you move into the management section. But also I think sometimes there's an element of, once you know everything about your line of business and you're quite an expert within that subject, to go into something where you don't necessarily have that kind of awareness of, it does feel a little bit tricky to think, right, I need to go on a training course and learn this from the beginning. So I think just allowing yourself that growth mindset, the ability to think, I've got lots of things that I don't know here. There'll probably be some things I do, but what could I learn? What could I benefit from? And getting on that training as early as you can, the resources that are available within the organisation, and also mentors yourself. So people who have made that transition themselves, making sure that you are somebody who can become a good, not just a good manager, but also a good leader. Down the line, one of the challenges for all managers is attracting talent to their own team, especially experienced talent. So if you are known across the market for being a good manager, that is going to make your job much easier when you're trying to build that team out around you.
Everything we've been talking about so far, Samantha, how much tougher is it as a result of COVID, which I guess sort of locked down offices for a year, 18 months, all of those personal connections went out of the window, and we were all on computers?
Yeah, and the answer does depend, I guess, on what stage in your career you were at. For individuals who had quite a sturdy, safe, secure network before COVID, it didn't have so much impact because you can maintain relationships that are long-term relationships over email, over video calls, much easier than creating relationships. So where I've seen the biggest challenges for those individuals who are sort of less than 5 years into their career, and at this stage they should be creating a vast variety of different connections across the market, and also going outside their comfort zone early enough to build out these skills while they're still kind of practicing them. So we've now got a group of people who've been in the market for a few years and technically have had a lot of experience. So they've been underwriting or broken from a technical perspective remotely for a good chunk of those years. Where they've missed out is those interactions face-to-face, those difficult conversations, projecting that empathy when there's a difficult challenge going on for a client, or having that negotiation where they really need to be able to kind of push something in a face-to-face environment. And those opportunities need to be practiced in person. So there's been a gap in time, but also as we return, where we're not coming back in full-time and no one expects to do so, we do need to make sure that we are getting valued experience in the time that we are in the office.
Final question for you. Covered a lot of ground, but if you had to leave a key takeaway for employers and one for an employee on the back of everything we've been chatting about, what would those two key things to remember be?
So for employers, I would encourage a setup that allows everybody to have career conversations and make it feel like it's their setup for you. So a great place to do this is, for example, in appraisal forms. Rather than just focusing on performance and objectives, have a question in there that asks people what their career goals are and what kind of support they need from their manager to get there. So it takes that awkward tension away from starting those conversations. And for individuals, we often use this phrase, it's who you know, but I'm a much bigger fan of it's who knows you. You can have a lot of people aware who you are in the market, and that will create opportunities. So don't hold back from giving yourself that visibility, getting on LinkedIn, finding speaking opportunities or speaking up in meetings to make sure that people are aware of who you are and also what you've got to offer.
We have to leave it there. Samantha Ridgewell, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.